Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. I am so excited to be joined by our featured leader today. We have Trevor Fry, lead data analyst on the People Insights and Analytics team at Pinterest. Trevor, I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into data science, what you do, what you do for fun. Maybe not all of those at the same time. I'll ask you for some updates. Um, who is Trevor Fry and what does he do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here today. And
Absolutely.
before I jump into anything, I just want to give a quick disclaimer that I am, expressing my own personal views here today and not necessarily representing Pinterest. So just to get
Of
that out of the way.
course.
But yeah, my name's Trevor. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. with my wife and our dog who just turned 1 year old yesterday. And we really like doing stuff outdoors, hiking, traveling. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, on the West Coast. So I'm still fairly new to living on the East Coast, and there's a lot to explore and see. And I've had a lot of fun doing that over the last few years. Um, as far as what I do, like you said, Libby, I'm a lead data analyst at Pinterest, more informally referred to as a people analytics partner. So what that means is I am on the people insights and analytics team, but I'm also like embedded in the business in the sense that I work very closely with our HR business partners and other cross-functional partners across the people team to support the employees that sit in our engineering and product organizations. So I do analytics and insights to support the engineers and the data scientists and the people who make Pinterest a thing. That really involves a wide range of topics. So analyzing like our org structure, headcount growth, employee representation. I work with hiring and recruiting to look at like different strengths or weaknesses or opportunities or like patterns that we might see in the types of candidates we're getting or the people that we're hiring. I've throughout my career, I've worked with like compensation and finance pretty often, just to align between our different functions. Um, Spent a lot of time throughout my career working with learning and development. So whether that's being sort of a thought partner in terms of what we want to include in our learning or our training content, or doing an analytics to really assess like the impact that that learning might have, or if it's actually working, if it's having the intended effect that we wanted. Performance, metrics, how we analyze who our top performers are. Are there patterns in how those performance ratings shake out? What drives high performers? What drives low performers? A lot of really open-ended questions.
Yeah.
And certainly like employee feedback. So like surveys, focus groups, any like sort of information we can get from employees, making sense of that. I could probably go on goal setting, helping define KPIs. But I would say the work really varies, both in breadth and depth. So like people often ask me like, oh, like what's your day to day look like? And to be honest, I feel like even before Pinterest, like my day today it's never the same thing every day. It's always a little bit different. There's always something new, some ad hoc request or something like that that comes up. So it could be anything from like, high level reporting just to help maybe leaders get a sense of our baseline or where we're currently at, the current state, um, sort of all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it's more of like a multi-team, cross-functional deep dive where we're triangulating the results of numerous explanatory analyses to try to make sense of something or to try to provide some like solid recommendations on how the business can move forward. So it really does range quite a bit.
That sounds nice, though. It sounds like you never get bored. It also kind of
I
sounds like
never
you
get
do the
bored.
job of five or six people. So hopefully you've got a
Uh,
big team.
we actually have a solid team. I wouldn't say we have a big team, but the challenge I think in people analytics is the balancing act, and that's a great call out, Libby. Like, um, in my space here and in previous roles, there's always sort of a push and pull of like having prioritized projects versus like these ad hoc needs or requests that come up. And I think that is one of the maybe more unique challenges to the people analytics field. But I really enjoy that, like working through that ambiguity. And I, throughout my career, I've had great support from like managers and leadership to help prioritize and make that balance. So I've never really felt like I was put in a corner or a tough place by that. But it is always something new, and I don't ever feel like I'm getting bored in this field.
Amazing.
Um,
Well, we have so many questions coming into Slido,
all
so I
right,
think it would be great to go ahead and hop over. Um,
sure.
let me go through. Sorry, guys, I am approving things in the background here. We have a question from Abby. Abby Allison, if you are available to unmute and ask that live, that'd be great. And if not, let me know and I can ask it.
Okay, hey guys. Um,
Hi.
yeah, my question is your bio on the posit page mentions bridging the data science practice gap. And so just what are some primary examples of that gap that you've experienced?
Oh, great question to start things off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was always when I was in grad school. I feel like that was always a topic of conversation. Like that, how do we bridge that science practice gap? Because I think there's a lot of like in the world of research and science, we have a lot of information, we have a lot of results and takeaways, but like translating that in a meaningful way back to business or business leaders can definitely be challenging. Um, I will say one of the things that I've found really helpful, and definitely a resource I would recommend. There's a book called Storytelling with Data by Cole Knaflack. She used to be at Google, I believe, and has since really spun off a whole sort of business with this book that she wrote. But it's a really incredible book in terms of like how we really communicate the the findings that we have, the meaning behind the data that we're working with to our stakeholders in a way that resonates with them. Um, not just in terms of like how we communicate it, but how we present that visually. The book does an amazing job of giving like examples of how to really highlight the what you're trying to pinpoint with like your charts or your tables or how you're presenting data. Um, I, I have read that book several times now. It's something I always go back to. But I think that's sort of one piece of it. I think bridging that science practice gap is always going to be a challenge. I don't think there's necessarily a solution to that. It's just something that we always have to kind of keep in the back of our minds and be prepared for.
And you have a pretty solid background in research. I don't think that we have mentioned specifically your educational background, but do you want to do a quick rundown on that? I know that you've told me it's a long story. There's too much to talk about,
Yeah.
but give us the brief view.
Yeah, I'll try to give it like the elevator pitch here and keep it concise. Because my journey into the field of people analytics has definitely not been a linear one. I started off in school studying psychology. I really loved psychology. I ended up getting into a grad program to get my master's degree in experimental psych, and at the time I was preparing to go into academia. Um, that just kind of seemed like the natural next step for the route that I was on. Coincidentally, I was working in the tutoring center. Again, I'm trying to keep this brief. Working in the tutoring center at my college campus, and that was really my happened to be my first sort of experience doing more applied research. So I had a pretty uh, administrative role as administrative assistant for the person who ran the tutoring program. That person happened to be pursuing their PhD in education. And so one day they came to me and they said, I've been doing research on, tutoring and basically what he told me is, as he had reviewed the literature, there's all these, peer-reviewed articles about how tutoring works, but almost all of it was done at the, elementary school level. There was a handful of articles that were published on high school students, but at that time there was really no peer-reviewed like literature out there that had evidence to say that tutoring works in post-secondary or in college level education. And so he was like, with the data you're working with, could we see if our tutoring program actually works? Which was really meaningful because every university in the country has a tutoring program almost, so it's a big investment, and to not know if it works or not seemed like a really cool opportunity. So long story short, did a bunch of analyses. We were able to demonstrate that our tutoring program did have an effect on people's grades and their grade improvements, and that became like the first paper that I actually got published. And so from there, I was like, I don't think I want to be a professor anymore. Like, I want to use these research skills in a more meaningful way. And I really enjoyed that opportunity to like work with real world data instead of, as opposed to just like being in a lab, which I loved being in labs. But that's when I learned about industrial organizational psychology. And so from there, I went into grad school for IO psychology. I ended up working at a small consulting firm while I was in school, which gave me exposure to a lot of different contracts. And I really felt helped me to become more agile and just like how I use my skills and how I could apply that to our the client work that we were doing. I got really into studying team effectiveness. I played sports growing up, so that was sort of a topic that I really gravitated towards in IO psychology, like the study of team and group dynamics and team effectiveness is really a hot topic. So that was something I really that really resonated with me, and that sort of launched me into the next stages of my career, working with the Navy and the Army Research Institute. Really doing a lot of mixed methods research, so combination of qualitative and quantitative research, which is fascinating. I thought I knew what research was, and then I learned about qualitative, and it's like a completely different world. So that was a really great experience. We're studying, multi-team systems and how, you know, ships and planes communicate and coordinate in a contested environment, and what can help facilitate that, or what can help enable that. From there, I ended up taking a job with the Army Research Institute, studying team effectiveness, but ultimately came to learn that I really wanted to do more like I was doing a lot of research, focus groups. I was starting to do some like machine learning stuff, but I really had an appetite for that, and I wanted to do more of like that advanced analytics. And so that's when I transitioned sort of out of government and defense work, and I took a job at Nordstrom as a workforce scientist.
What a
Actually, a
cool
data
title.
science role. Yeah, really cool title. I wish I still
Yeah.
had that. But that's when I really kind of got into the field of people analytics and started to learn how to like hone my skills even more with that like people data and with that like HR focus, and really focusing on more like business outcomes as opposed to more of the kind of foundational research type thing. So long-winded story there, but that's sort of my journey into the field of people analytics.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of people can identify with having a sort of windy journey. We were all saying in the chat that we have lots of nonlinear paths, and I'm the same way. But we have so many questions in Slido. We're not going to be able to get to all of them today, but many of them are
Okay.
fantastic. Um, so you mentioned that there was a little bit of nuance there between data science work at Pinterest or people analytics and what you would consider like traditional data science work. There's a question from Noor in the chat that's really along those lines. Noor, are you available to unmute and ask your question?
Hello. Oh,
Hi.
hi. Sorry, my throat's a little sore. Hi. So yes, as Libby said, I'm interested. Like, what are the nuances that you would say distinguish data science at Pinterest, as well as the data science that seems to be more, I guess, people facing in your role versus more traditional data science? And what advice would you have for people who are trying to get more experience or hands-on experience in that type of data?
Yeah, good question. So I will say like my answer is going to be a little bit biased because I don't consider myself like a traditional data science. That's not my my education or my background per se. I do think the type of like the way I approach problems in people analytics is probably not that much different than a data scientist might approach problems in their space. Where I think where the nuance probably would come in is just like the nature of people data being a bit more sensitive. We have to be very careful. This isn't a Pinterest thing. Like anywhere you're working in people analytics, you have to be very careful with like just anonymizing data, making sure like how we're dealing with like within our HR records, there's always going to be a lot of personally identifying information. So how we consume that, how we make sure that that's protected and that's not shared in some inappropriate way. That's definitely an important nuance to it. I would say how we there might be other nuance in like how we manage data when it comes to like some of the more finer details of like how we manage missing data or
Mm.
um, how we're working with like a nested model because in an organization like almost everything is nested. Like we have people working on teams, working in departments, working in larger organizations, and so how we might account for that might be different than how you might do that if you were working like a with like a some sort of like visual machine learning algorithm or something like that. For us, I will also say that there's the nuance of in people analytics, like one of the most important things is being able to explain like the output or the result to our stakeholders. And so how we approach that might be a bit different just in like how we communicate it. Again, I'll go back to Cole's book on storytelling with data as a reference there. I don't think that's limited to just people analytics. I think anybody who's working with data would should find value in that book. Um, Hopefully that answers your question. That's kind of a tough one to answer, but I think that's the best I can do.
I think that was a great answer. It sounds like people analytics has maybe a lot more of the qualitative mixed in by default, because human beings
Oh,
are
sure.
complex, right? And then I wanted to say there was a great thing, Trevor, the last time I spoke to you that you said to me. You said, in order to successfully drive the message home, you have to speak the language that the audience is speaking. And
Yes.
you said that in the military, when you were working with the military, you even needed to like get down to the level of explaining what data means. Like what is data? What does Trevor mean when Trevor's saying data? And I think that that's such a great call out. Like you have to get down to the bits and pieces of what you're talking about and make sure that the other person's understanding the same thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, Being able to speak the language of your audience is absolutely critical. I had no idea how many acronyms I was going to learn when I started working in the military space, but I still remember a lot of those today, and sometimes they just like come out automatically. I think as I was working, even in grad school, as like as a consultant, that's something I picked up on too. Like we had a lot of different contracts from government, private industry, some military, and so like from one day to the next, like the level of detail, the exact like language I'm using and the terminology I would use would often shift. And really just trying to align with that audience. So reduces confusion, we have to answer less questions. And ultimately like to get their buy-in on either what we're finding or what we're recommending. Yeah, I do remember early on in my data science career when I was working with people with engineering backgrounds. and they were the ones who asked me, like, when you say data, what do you mean? Because in my head, I had a very clear understanding of like we were working with a survey, so it's like it's the survey responses. And the engineers had a much broader, interpretation of what qualifies as data. So that was definitely a moment I won't forget.
I'm sort of laughing a little bit, everybody, because I have also worked in defense and have also like swum in those military acronyms, and it's so much. If you think that corporate acronyms are overwhelming, you have not seen anything until you've been in
No.
the military space. I remember I kept saying when I first got into the military space, I kept saying EOD for end of day, and everybody was like, "Libby, you have to stop because EOD is explosive ordnance disposal." And it's not something that you should be saying all the time. There's lots of heads nodding, and yes, I should know better. I come from literally Military City, USA. So fantastic question, Noor. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, while we are sort of in this space and we're talking about what data science is and how we do it, usually by this time we have asked a tech stack question, and I wanted to throw that in there. So what tools do you use to do data science, whether that's at Pinterest or anywhere else? So languages, IDEs, environments that you work in. Do you use Databricks? Do you use Snowflake? Do you use any tools that we would recognize? And it doesn't have to be Pinterest specific, because I know that you've worked at a couple of other
Yeah.
places too.
Yeah. I have worked with Snowflake, Microsoft SQL Server Manager Studio. It's been a while. Something, a lot of different like data sourcing. I mean, throughout my career, I've had plenty of times where I just received like Excel spreadsheets full of data too. For me, my preference for almost as long as I can remember now is RStudio. I at a certain point in grad school committed myself to wanting to learn R. In psychology at the universities I went to, and I think most typically teach statistics in SPSS, which is expensive and clunky and sort of limited in what you can do with it, at least in my experience. But R seemed like sort of just like the holy grail of being able to do like anything and everything, or build, functions and build your own algorithms. So that is like where I spend the majority of my time doing analytics is in RStudio. I prefer it for a lot of different reasons. I have had use cases and projects where I've worked on Python. I don't think I'm fluent in Python, but I'm comfortable with it. But ultimately, like for me in the space that I work in, like applied statistics, I just feel like the packages that come in are much more robust and just fit sort of my need much better. Yeah, I say I do use other like Tableau. I've sort of grown to like. I was resistant to it at first, but building dashboards in Tableau has been definitely helpful, especially in some cases. I still do use like Excel and Google Sheets for some things, less and
I mean,
less these days,
I use
but
Sheets every
I
single day.
it's
No
it's
shade
it's
to
kind of
Excel. It's amazing.
unavoidable. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, really like I spend most of my time in RStudio. We have the Posit Cloud at Pinterest now, so that connects directly to our data sources. So that's been a big improvement in terms of efficiency. So not having to like work with
Yeah.
flat files.
You are spoiled with Connect.
Yeah, that's been a huge lift or lift off of our backs, and also just like I know the security. I'm not a security expert, but I know that like the Deposit Cloud is a much more secure environment than downloading flat files onto your laptop and then having
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a lot
Encourage
of
them.
there's a lot of security questions around AI right now, and that was something that I wanted to ask you about. Let me see if we have any questions
Oh
here
yeah.
in our Slido that we would like to ask while I am asking you about AI, because we have so many and I would love to get to them. One of them is about third-party data. Gregory, if you are available to ask that question, I will ask you to unmute and I will have to find you if you'll give me just 1 second here.
Gregory
There you are.
Power. I just found
Yes.
it. Yes.
No
Yay, there
worries.
you are, Greg.
Howdy.
Hi.
Yeah, I guess my question. Good, interesting that you also worked for defense. Ironically, one of the software projects I worked with is GRASS, which was geospatial software from the
Okay.
U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but um, and another geointelligence stuff. But I'm kind of curious about what role third-party data plays, like for example, from data brokers and stuff like that for what role does that kind of data play into your analysis? And is geospatial something that's kind of important for the kind of analysis that you do?
Good question. To be perfectly transparent, I don't think I've ever really worked with like geospatial data much in people analytics, aside from maybe like understanding our organization's population in terms of like the geo footprint, like where people are sitting. I mean, I've done a lot of analyses between like remote and hybrid and in-office employees, but that I know that's not really getting at what you're talking about in terms of geospatial data. Um, yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm trying to think about how we might use that in our space. I will say, like in terms of third-party data brokers, I haven't really worked with any in people analytics. Maybe the exception might be like just benchmarking data.
That was what I was going to say. Like, what about data on like what is normal across an industry? Like, do you get information like that from, I don't know, who does that? What firms provide that information? Research firms probably.
Yeah, there are vendors that provide that. Geez, I'm trying to think of uh, Gartner. I know is a big one that a lot of people use. I know Aon has some different benchmarking services that they offer. I'm a little biased against benchmarking. I don't feel like it ever really is an apples to apples comparison. Um, and I think leaders often assume that it is. So that's something I often get hung up on. I will say, like, I think some of the better benchmarking stuff is the government provided. So, like the JOLTS survey that the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out, it's a little lagged in that, like, it's always like a month or two behind of sort of the current date. But I think that's a more objective and more sort of robust benchmark than some of the private ones that people pay for. Again, that's my opinion.
I think a month is actually pretty good. It's pretty quick considering the lag that we see in some places. I think, yeah, Kevin Swinson says a month is really good. Thank you,
I
Greg, for
think
the
it's two
fantastic
months, and
question
then
there.
yeah,
Well, even 2 months, I think, is pretty good.
it's
All
good
right.
until we were in like the Great Resignation phase, and everybody
Yeah,
needed to know
that's
what was
true.
going on right now, and we
It
needed
depends
like
on what's happening,
immediate
right?
benchmarks. So yeah, it
I
it
think that
depends
that's
on the use.
the problem of like, hey, our leadership thinks that this industry benchmark that's coming from this organization is a good standard, and I don't think it's really helpful. I think that in some way, shape, or form, a lot of data people have experienced that before, where they're like speaking to these standards or just averages in general, and you're having to explain like this average is not representation of anything. It's that average doesn't exactly exist anywhere. So
Hmm.
it's interesting. All right, I have some fantastic questions here, and I would love to have Jorge or George. I don't know if you are saying your name Jorge or George Montoya unmute and ask yours. I think it's a fantastic question.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey
Let me share
there.
my camera too. Sorry for the glare.
No, it's all right.
Uh,
Nice to see you.
yeah. Thanks for being here, Trevor. I guess my question is a little bit more on the abstract side, but high level of like what strategies would you suggest for someone that wants to motivate a more data-driven culture, right? In the HR department of the importance for people analytics, right? So like for example, for the company that I work on, like we have like survey data, workday data, things like that, right? But we necessarily do not run analysis on top of that data, right? So like what strategies or what recommendations would you have to sell the idea of like, hey, maybe applying some data analytics workflows could help provide some more insights as to like what you had mentioned before, like employee, attrition or just productivity and on overall improve business outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a question I read a lot about. I know like developing a more, data literate culture and more data literate leadership is I read articles about that. I feel like at least a couple times a week. And throughout my career, I feel like that's just been an ongoing conversation. Uh, my advice, if you're start trying to just like you've got data and you're trying to figure out like how to get buy-in to start like leveraging it, would be like start small and like figure out what your stakeholders like what are the gaps your stakeholders are facing. Like is there like a problem that they're struggling to solve, to understand? um okay, let me give a more specific example, like survey data. You said you got survey data. For me as an IO psychologist, that is like the gold mine of data sources. If I could work in survey data, like employee survey data, all day, I probably would, because I think it's just such a rich resource and such good information that we get like from our employees, whether that's just through the scores or the comments that they leave. But I've often found like leaders are often asking questions like, well, what drives whatever, fill in the blank. What drives engagement? What drives job satisfaction? What's driving, our sentiment on manager support? Um, if you can find those types of questions and provide some insight to that, I think that's how you can start to build that buy-in. And then in my experience, once somebody kind of gets that taste for like, oh, like kind of having that aha moment with the data that you're presenting them, they're going to start coming back for more. They're going to be like, hey, well, you showed us what drove engagement, like what's driving burnout, what else can we do with this? And from there, I feel like you get the ball rolling and you start to develop trust with your stakeholders. And then you can start to think about those more long-term, like, okay, how do we build a workflow to support this in a more consistent or ongoing or long-term way? But I do think to build that trust and to get that buy-in, you do kind of have to start out with something bite-sized to get things started. That would be my best advice. Maybe that won't work for everyone or in every, environment, but yeah, I think that's the best advice I could give you on starting to like trigger that sort of desire to be more data literate.
I think that's great advice, Trevor. Small wins, quick wins early on are fantastic. I think that I am too much of a detail-oriented person and a question asker to work in your area, because as you were talking, my brain was going, well, what if people are lying on surveys? What if that's not the truth? Like my favorite marketing professor always said, if you survey people, they're always going to give you one of three answers: the truth, a lie, or a lie that they think is the truth because they don't actually know what they want, right? Like, hey, what kind of what product choice would you make in this area? And they say, oh, product A. But then when they get to the store and they're actually at the shelf, they're going to pick C for some reason that they haven't decided on yet. And so whenever I think about employee survey data, that boggles my mind. And I think that would stop me in my tracks, make me less
There's
productive.
a there's a cool, I think that's a valid concern, and yeah, we could probably talk for hours
I
about
know.
that. But like, I
We
will say
don't have
one
to
thing
go into it.
I learned about an analysis a few years ago at the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology has a conference every year, and I saw this presentation on something called heartbeat analysis. So real quick, like if you think about when people are taking a survey, sometimes people just kind of go down the line and they just, if it's on a scale of 1 to 5, they're just clicking 5 for everything. But maybe there's one item that they really feel negative about. And so it's fives on everything, but then there's like a 1 on this one item. This heartbeat analysis, basically you're normalizing everybody's scores and seeing which items are they scoring higher or lower than their sort of normal score. And so you count them as like up votes and down votes. And it's sort of an interesting and different way to interpret the data. But in one of my previous roles, we used that, and it got a lot of traction with leadership. They
I
really
mean, it
seemed to
makes a lot of
resonate.
sense to me. Yeah, because when you fill out a survey or when you look at a lot of survey data, you realize that for a lot of people, 4 is the highest they're going to score anything. They're not going to give anything a 5. So if
Yeah,
they give everything a 4 and then one thing a 5, you're like, oh wow, they really felt strongly about that one. And I'm that same person. I don't give anything a 0. I don't give anything a 5. I find myself like really sticking to the center. Um, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to
yeah.
Google that. Somebody put some links in the chat for me so I can see them later. All right, let's move to a Slido question. And Nicole, you asked a question, and I would love it if you are still here, if you could unmute and ask it, Nicole Burke.
Yeah, hi, Trevor.
Hi.
Hi, thanks, Libby. Yeah, Trevor, nice to meet you. I'm also a fellow psych PhD who thought I wanted to do academia, now trying to transition to PhD. Great to
Awesome.
chat with you today. Yeah, so mine's kind of more of like a forecasting question. Like, I would love to kind of like hear your thoughts of like what you think are going to be like questions or like things that are top of mind for like folks in this space in the next like, I don't know, like 5 years, let's say. Like, I know like attrition and employee listening get talked about a lot. Like, do you still think those are the things folks are going to be like focused on, or like are there other like, yeah, like topics or things that like, people in this space are like excited about?
Good question. Yeah. I mean, I think like most spaces, AI has been like the topic of conversation the last couple of years. And I think as a field, we're still trying to figure out like how to use that, like how we're going to use it effectively and efficiently. Trying to think of like something beyond just AI, because that seems pretty like that's what everybody's talking about now. Um, I know like, well, I don't work in this space, but I have friends that do. Like IO psychology really focuses on like assessments, like pre-hire assessments, and how we select the right people for the right job. That's really what the field was built on. And I think over the last few years, I know there's been a lot of projects. I don't know anybody that's really got this off the ground yet, but um, like to do like interviewing in more automated ways, like where you're basically interviewing with some sort of AI chatbot or entity, and the algorithms are scoring based on the answers and your behaviors and things like that. I think that's been sort of fraught with bias, and that's why we haven't really seen that more broadly. But I know that's something that like there's a lot of interest in that, and like being able to do that and to get it right, which is obviously the hardest part. So I would say probably start seeing more of that as Gen AI continues to like advance. What else? I do wonder, like some of the recent research, I know personality assessments used to be a lot more common for like pre-hire assessments, and it seems like that's shifting in terms of how many like who's using it and how those assessments are designed. See a lot more like forced choice type personality measures now compared to like some of the more traditional, just uh, like behaviorally anchored type type rating scales. That's a good question. It's hard to predict what's going to happen next, even when we work with all the data.
Yep. Even when we're right there with it. You've mentioned AI. It's the upcoming thing. It's on everybody's mind. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're excited about specifically? Like, how are you starting to integrate it, and what are you excited about integrating LLMs into your workflow to tackle?
Yeah, definitely. I work with them a lot. For me, again, I'll lean back on like the employee survey stuff because that's really one of my favorite things to work with. But I think one of the most challenging things in people analytics, maybe not the most challenging, but definitely the most time consuming thing we do is analyzing all of the comments that come in on the employee surveys. And oftentimes, a survey closes and we have maybe a week or two to analyze all the data and get decks out to leadership to share those findings. And so, like when you've got 20, 30, 40,000 comments to sift through, that becomes pretty overwhelming for such a short time frame. And so as these AI models have come out, I immediately was like, oh, this could really help make our comment analysis process much more efficient. I think one of the challenges though is in like, as I'm working with the AI, like I really don't need like a creative writing co-pilot. I need like a scientist co-pilot. So like I need the AI to get it right and I need it to be reliable. Like if I give the AI a batch of comments and ask it a question, like I should get the same response that my counterpart gets or anybody else on my team would get. And so I've been exploring like more of the like local models using like Olama where I can set temperatures and do a little more like tuning, and I feel like that's been generally successful. Getting the exact same response every time is still a challenge, but I do feel like that's going to be one of the big successes for people analytics is being able to process all of that like unstructured data in a much more efficient way. Again, I feel like right now it's like we get an output and then we have to go back and like check to see, do it ourselves to see like how close the output actually was. But
Right.
I think that's definitely um, a ripe opportunity for people analytics with using AI. I know
Perfect.
there's some other like being able to just give it like a table of data and ask it a question about it. I'd really like to see how that advances, maybe to the previous question about like building that data literacy, like for HR business partners or other people outside of the people analytics team to be able to self-serve and do some of those analyses on their own to create those insights. I think that would be really beneficial for organizations as well.
Thank you. I think that we answered Zach's question. So Zach had asked, what kind of impact do you expect AI to have on people analytics? And I think it just went away. I think that's
Sorry,
perfect.
that was me, Libby.
Rachel's stealing my questions, y'all. Okay, I have a question here from Mike. Mike, do you want to unmute and ask your question, Mike Smith?
I'll try. There you
There
go.
he is. Hey.
So I'm interested in this because I'm in a kind of similar role where being a consultant within your organization, being kind of a just-in-time data guy or a data team. I think the people that we work most closely with value our input and see our value. But how do you express your return on investment of having that data team or those data consultants upwards within the organization? What's the value of having a just-in-time data team?
That's a tough question. That's a really good question. I think it's really challenging. This isn't something we've done at Pinterest, but in my previous roles, I have had cases where there was like a really strong desire to see like ROI of everything, and leaders who really wanted to put like a dollar sign on every single program we had to say like, is this costing us or is this saving us money? And I think with people programs, it's incredibly challenging to do. I think in order to do it, you're going to have to align on like accepting some assumptions. I think for me, that was like the biggest blocker is, we would come up with like, okay, like here's a way we can model the cost of something, but it's never like the full, it felt like you're never really covering all the bases. It's kind of like this, it's a signal, it's the best we've got, this is what based on the data we have, this is what we think. But there's always a leader to say, oh, well, what about, we're not accounting for this, we're not accounting for that. And it was very, very challenging to ever really come to an endpoint on yes, this is the ROI of this program. I think there are some with people data, there's things you can lean on, like turnover, cost of turnover is something we can get pretty close to, I think. So leaning on things like that, like or like maybe like time to productivity, you could put sort of a monetary value on. And so it was really about like identifying like what can we associate a cost to, and then from there, like how can we make sense of that in some way? Like how are these things related? It was fun in the sense that it was very ambiguous and like no one knew what the right answer was. But again, like it was a big challenge to work with leaders and to get them sort of bought into, yes, this is the ROI of this training or this onboarding system or whatever it happened to be. That's a big challenge. It's a lot to bite off.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Somebody in the chat said, quantify soft skills, go. I think it was Jared.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Such a challenge. Thank you,
Yeah,
Mike,
it
for the
is.
fantastic question. And there are a couple of other questions that we have definitely hit in the chat. We've kind of answered them through answers to other questions, like Madison's question about integrating tech into people analytics. Thank you, Madison, for that fantastic question. I know that we're getting closer to the top of the hour. This has been such a fantastic conversation. I want to be able to go grab another question here from Slido. Let's see. So Megan had asked, and she can't unmute to ask it, so I will ask it, what kinds of qualitative data? So we mentioned qualitative data a few times, or qualitative analysis. Can you give a quick rundown on what is qualitative versus quantitative data in people analytics?
Yeah, in people analytics, it's primarily going to be comments from like survey, any like open-ended comments, whether that's a survey or some other form, interviews or focus groups. So I've had projects where we've done interviews, facilitated focus groups, transcribe everything. In grad school, I was taught how to do like qualitative research in a more traditional way. So not necessarily using like NLP, but literally going like into the text and highlighting and making codes and basically doing topic modeling from scratch. So that's some of the qualitative data. In people analytics, I don't know that there's not really much other qualitative data I have worked with aside from those types of things. I'm trying to think if there might be other like behavioral type observations, but even then we're really getting more into the quantitative world. I do remember when I first started at the Army, I thought I knew what qualitative research was because I had studied mixed methods. And I quickly learned that like what I thought was qualitative was still quantitative. Like for me, I would think like, okay, let's look at our topic modeling and whatever the most frequent topic that came up, that's sort of our key topic. And it's like, no, that's quantitative. If you're counting anything, if you're ranking anything, like you're not doing qualitative anymore. So I would say in people analytics, we do more of that mixed methods type of stuff. Like we're organizing qualitative data and then analyzing it in qualitative and quantitative ways.
Awesome. Well, we only have a few minutes left, but maybe we can tackle sort of a hybrid version of several of these questions, which are about modeling and about approaching measuring things. For example, Bonnie asked, what's the best approach to measure something like incentive that's sensitive? You can't really set up A/B testing. So, like, what kind of methods or models would you work on there? And I think that Arsenis had asked a question about modeling, and maybe Rohan as well. Common methods that people in analytics teams or people analytics teams are using. Do you use structured equation modeling? So, SEM. Maybe a quick rundown on that before we say goodbye.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had more time to answer this. Yes,
I know it's a big one.
Structural equation modeling is one of my favorite things to go to. You can do a lot with SEM, especially in terms of like looking at like mediators and moderators of different relationships between your predictors and your outcomes, being able to control for multicollinearity in predictors and outcomes. Okay, one package I use a lot, and I'll go back to the topic of like understanding drivers when it comes to survey analysis, like what drives engagement. Relative weights analysis, and there's a package in R called RWA, is a really powerful tool for doing this. I won't go into the details of how it works with 3 minutes left, but essentially it's a way of using multiple regression that allows you to control for multicollinearity in your predictors. So it gives us a way of rank ordering sort of what the most important features are for whatever outcome we're looking at. That's a model that I've leaned on quite a bit over the last several years of my career, and I feel like stakeholders that I've been able to like land that pretty well and get buy-in on what that means. I mean, when it comes to like how we're validating what we're measuring, confirmatory factor analysis is, I think, the gold standard for that. Sorry, I don't have more time to really dive into this. Those are sort of like top of mind, like what I lean on most often, though. I will say, like Keith McNulty has a book called on regression. I think one of the previous guests recommended it, and in the foreword of that book, I think Alexis Fink from Meta wrote it, and she refers to regression as the Swiss Army knife for people analytics, and I always keep that in the back of my mind. Like it's such a great tool, like to lean on. Like if we don't know what else if we don't have another approach in mind, like regression is always a great place to start.
Fantastic. All right. Resources are in the chat. Rachel linked Keith McNulty's book, which is great. I am so glad to hear that somebody out there is using CFA. It makes me feel better about learning it in undergrad for so long. Thank you so much, Trevor, for spending time with us. Everybody, it was so wonderful to have you here. I am going to stick around for another minute in case you would like to save the chat. So up in the right-hand corner of the chat, you can click the little three dots and save it. That way you have got it, all those resources. And I wanted to let everybody know that next week we have Cara Thompson. I am so excited. Cara Thompson is a data visualization amazing person, runs her own business called Building Stories with Data, and I'm so excited for everybody to meet her. So thank you, Trevor.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy Friday, everybody. Happy birthday to Rachel. We'll see you on Thursday.